Let's say you are one of the most senior PMs at Airbnb. You have to put together a strategy for COVID. How are you going to go about doing this?
Okay, so just so that we are like on the same page around the scope of the problem. So we're talking
Mhm.
about Airbnb, which is like a tourist travel rental platform where there's a marketplace where there are hosts
Mhm.
who have like full properties or part of their properties to rent out for people to come and stay. And then there is like the guests who are the ones that are renting out the space. So that's kind of the overarching business model. And from what I understand and what I know from the COVID pandemic, what has happened to them, like in the beginning when the COVID struck, they actually went down with their business quite a bit because people were in panic. They completely stopped traveling and COVID was spreading across different countries. So they had to even let go of a lot of people in their workforce. But after some time, say during summer, and people were things were opening up and people were learning more about the disease itself and the precautions, it actually turned around quite differently for them because the Airbnb was more of, a secluded place, which was not a hotel, and you could actually rent out a place, stay by yourself, and there was less chance of spreading. So their business actually picked up. So that's kind of like, from what I understand, what has happened. So in terms of overarching strategy dealing with COVID, I'm like, my inclination is to go around looking at, currently with the COVID pandemic, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the company from where we stand today? And then what is like the market landscape looks like? And then maybe we can come up with different ideas. Does that sound
All right.
good?
Yep, that sounds like a good approach.
Okay. So then give me like 15 seconds for the coming up with the quick SWOT analysis on this. Okay. So I think I'm looking at the overall positioning of the company based on COVID and, the world after COVID, what it might look like. So just as an FYI. So looking at the strengths first. So I think the company in itself, has been one of the major strengths is that the company has been an established platform even before pandemic. So
Mhm.
it's something that people are familiar with. They know how to work with this and they have a ecosystem of hosts and guests in many prime locations in the world. So that's definitely a plus. And with the pandemic, I think because you can rent out a whole house and there isn't a lot of interaction with a lot of people like you would have probably in a resort or a hotel. And so it sounds more safe to people to travel to a place. And you can actually do Airbnb. I'm not sure if it would apply anyway for anything, but like there is a lot of, for example, in California, there's a lot of Airbnb open up in Tahoe. So people have opened up their vacation homes for Airbnb because people wanted to live and go in a full house and not in a hotel. So it just gives them like there are many different opportunities in the sense that you can grow your network based on the situation in the current pandemic. In terms of the weaknesses, I think the strengths are also weaknesses because it is a secluded, more of like a guest and a host kind of system. There could be less confidence in guest in terms of the cleanliness and the hygiene of the place. So they might think, I'm not sure like how much the host have invested in cleaning the place. So the guest could feel where they're going to. So they might be unsure or puzzled, as well as so more in control overall by themselves, but they also feel that it's not like a Hilton hotel, that Hilton has a certain standard. It's really a person's house that they're staying in. So that could become an issue, even though like Airbnb is an established platform, but I think people have a certain brand image with the hotels or big resorts versus like even like the Airbnb Lux might not be that might not build that confidence in people. And then going to opportunities, I think there are a lot. So given that people do want to go to places where they are owning the whole place by themselves, Airbnb can actually make it more comfortable for people by bringing in more trust, by collaborating with, cleaners or hygiene services or even like COVID tests. And, there are multiple opportunities to build that confidence and grow that kind of trend of travel that will probably remain even post pandemic for a few years. And they can really build upon that. And then in terms of threats, I think there are a lot more other competitors in the space like big resorts, hotels, Booking.com, Expedia. They're all working towards making sure that people feel COVID safe. So they're already going in and establishing measures, and they have a full-fledged staff to do that for their guests on like the resort sites or even for travel. So I think Airbnb is more of a standalone system in that respect. So it can lose that battle if they're not careful or if they don't act fast to catch up and make sure that they build that confidence. So that's kind of like my understanding of where the landscape is. I can come up with 2 or 3 main areas in terms of building an overall strategy, and then we can discuss where we want to focus on.
Yeah, I think you've covered all the major elements. Yeah, which of these would you pick and put into your strategy?
Give me like 10 seconds on that. Yeah. Okay. So I have like 3 main areas that I think that could be interesting to, or like can have a lot of potential in building the next phase of Airbnb overall strategy for travel. So the first one is more around building more confidence in the hosts. So it could be like a COVID host verification type of solution where Airbnb can invest in a team or a business unit that actually takes care of certain measures and make sure that this host is doing things or maintaining a certain level of cleanliness and sanitization and everything to make the site COVID safe. So that would build confidence in guests that will stay there, that this has been COVID safe certified and I can stay there. I can expect a certain level of cleanliness, and so that can take away some sort of worry. The second one is more around building a system of going one step further and giving people more information around how many COVID cases has been in this area. So there are like multiple companies like Apple and even Facebook are coming up with COVID graphs. So you can actually, you can actually volunteer to be tracked, and then it can have a tracking of COVID graph and how many people with COVID has been visiting in this area, how safe it is to visit overall. So Airbnb can provide that information to people wanting to visit a particular tourist site, and that can build up confidence that maybe this place or this particular location doesn't have a lot of COVID. And the third area is even like as things start opening up and normal life, or people want to go back to their normal life, one of the things that might still need a lot more push is like air travel, because locally people can get into their cars and book sites and still okay, but the international Airbnb business still needs to take up. So I think for that, Airbnb can collaborate with airlines and medical staff or medical institutions and as well as governments to make sure that tourism is still safe and people who are coming in are properly tested. Airbnb can bring up that information on its platform so people who are booking and traveling are feeling more safe. So that's the third part of the overall like strategy. And I think it's a bit like sequential in certain respect, but I would love to know where would you want me to focus on?
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. Like if you had to put these one after another, how would you prioritize between these?
Yeah, I think the priority order, I think 1 and 2 need to happen almost in parallel. And I would say 1 is a little more important than maybe 2, because there is a certain segment of users who want to travel, locally or interstate, and they are okay, but they have this reluctance of, I don't know where I'm staying in. So the host verification and some measures of COVID safety verification stamped by Airbnb or maybe some other organization that people can trust can build that confidence and get those people back to traveling again. But with the numbers going up again and people have a lot more questions around the vaccine, so the COVID safety program or COVID tracking will also probably be a quick follow-up or just happen like almost in parallel. The third one can actually be like a little bit later once, things start opening up within different countries more, than air travel could be the next step.
Understood. Let's explore the first one. Then let's say you've been tasked with executing on building together this host verification or certification mechanism that we're going to show up there. And as the PM now of that team, what are you going to do? How are you going to execute on this?
Okay. Give me like 1 minute or so to kind of collect my thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can actually start and then maybe I can take a little bit more pause towards when I go through the solution. But I think the way I would approach this is that I'll talk about first, given that the scope is building an overall host verification system for in terms of COVID measures, I will first talk about the users or the people who are be using this product, who are part of the ecosystem. And then I'll talk about their specific needs, their functional as well as their emotional needs. And then we can talk about solutions in that area of couple of solutions or more. And then we can prioritize solutions based on their investment to impact ratio.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. So starting with the users, I think there are two different, two sides of this marketplace. One is the hosts. Mm-hmm. Actually, three. One is the host that is putting up their property for rental or and tourism. And then the second is the guests who are booking the property. And third is really the Airbnb, as platform providing these facilities. So for the purpose of this, I will focus on, host and guest and then come up with a solution that addresses their needs.
All right.
So cool. So going into the needs, first let's talk about the needs for the guests. So talking about their functional needs, they need a place to stay when they visit a new city, needs to be meet certain standards, be a good place. And then now taking it a little I think basic amenities that they would expect to go to any other place should be there. And taking it to the next level of emotional as well as COVID needs in the pandemic, I would say that they want to, the first thing that comes to mind is safety. They want to make sure that they are not exposing themselves to extra risk by traveling at this time. So they want to know some way that they are going to a clean place and hasn't been exposed to virus in the last few weeks or something. And then another thing that they want is say somebody still, falls sick, what are the medical support and measures that they can get in case, something happens? Is there a backup plan that I can be still taken care of? What if I get stuck there? What if I actually somehow contract the virus and I'm stuck there? What happens then? And the another thing is in terms of cancellations and say, I'm booking this say 2 weeks ahead and then I suddenly don't want to do this or there's something come up because of the changing situation, numbers change. Can I still go ahead and cancel it and get my money back? So I think these are the primary needs that come to mind. In terms of need for the guests, I think the first thing that they want to also make sure is they are getting business. So Airbnb, some guests do it as a part-time for their vacation homes, they rent it out. So it's not a primary source of income. Some of them actually invest in it as, real full-time business, and they really need this money to sustain their business. So they do want to get in guests, so they want to make sure they're able to run their business. So that's one. And then the second thing is they want to make sure the guests who are coming in, very basic functional needs, are respecting their property, staying well, also not, and, taking to the next level of emotional or, COVID side of needs, that they also don't want the people who are coming in to not take precautions. Say they have COVID, they don't want them to travel and stay in their property. Or if there's somebody who's eligible to take the vaccine, they want to make sure they have already been vaccinated, at least for the short term until everybody is. So those are some of the basic needs that come to mind given the state of things in the pandemic. So I can come up with a couple of options or solutions in the next 30 seconds to see what we can do around this.
Yeah, let's focus on the guest side only. Within the guest side, let's say we're going to pick some of these ideas and build them into a certification system. How would you go around doing that now?
Okay, let me think about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have 3 ideas that we can go with in terms of product solutions. So the first one is, somewhat basic in terms of it will give the basic information to users. Say, for example, say I'm a user who wants to book an Airbnb site for staying in Lake Tahoe. And in terms of certifications, building a guest certification system, Airbnb can have a team focused on making sure that while I'm booking, I'm able to see how many COVID cases have been there in that zip code in the last 2 weeks. So I'm able to track the, the overall penetration, overall prevalence of the virus in that particular area.
Yeah.
The second thing that can happen is Airbnb would have a special team for all the hosts that are certified to make sure they're following a certain level of cleanliness measures. And there can be tiers within that. Like tier 1 is like everybody has to qualify to make sure they are like meeting the basic needs of cleanliness and like a disinfection. But there could be like multiple tiers. Like the basic tiers is making sure the whole place is clean and properly after somebody leaves and everything is new. So there is like no issues there. So there could be like it can collaborate with different services who have been helping with medical, supplies and stuff to make sure that there is some sort of like brand name that helps Airbnb that this is a good certification. The second tier could be more around like going to the next level. So everything is clean, but then this host is also having, disinfectants in every room that you stay in. Or I think they have this infrared or some sort of like other like gray machines that kills the virus. So they have the whole place equipped with that. So that gives it's a next level of precaution. And the basic level would also include everybody will have the ability to get masks and sanitizers everywhere. So I think the first idea is like you get the information of what's the prevalence of virus, as well as for every host that you show on your platform has the basic certification. And if they do, I would go with like, we don't even get the host who don't have that certification at this point, because that would really impact the confidence. And we don't want people to take risk, even if they want to take the risk, they're open to, we don't want it. And then the third thing is like different tiers, like tier 1 is basic, everything is good. And the tier 2 or 3 is like even to the next level. So that's one idea. The second one is actually bringing in some sort of like virtual tour to the Airbnb platform. So I can actually tour I can use some sort of AR, VR, and I can actually see what it would be like when I'm there. What does the facility feel like and everything. So it will do two things. One, it will build more confidence, or like just from an experience standpoint, it will also like excite the tourists and users to come and travel more, because they will get the feel of it. They will feel it more realistically, and they may want to like that hump of not traveling they may be able to overcome that. So the second idea has everything that the first has, but it also has the capability of virtual tour. Yeah. The third one is more around adding like a medical assistant, like in every host site that people go in, like it could be any smart device, like a speaker, like Alexa, or a portal where, it's connected to the medical facilities in that area. So you can talk about if you don't feel good, you can talk about what do I do with this? What can I get? Yeah. How can I get this? And the system will answer based on that particular area and get people what they need, because it could feel very secluded given that things are still opening up. So if they have something at their fingertips and they can find things easily, it will build more confidence with Airbnb. So
good ideas, all of them. Let's go with the certification one, where we are providing additional information about the site to the guest. How are you going to get, I want to discuss two components here. The first is, what is it going to look like in the user interface? You've referred to tiers and the like, and that's great, but maybe flesh out a rudimentary design to show where and what information you'd show in your MVP. And the second is, how would you actually execute on this? How would you gather this data at a property level?
Okay. Give me like few seconds to think through this. Okay. So I think in terms of like the experience, because this is a new concept, so I have like very rough diagram over here. The user first come in. So say we enable this feature, we will actually have a first time experience around COVID certification, which will walk people through like what it means, what we have done, and what kind of information like they can get for a site that is COVID certified for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And in terms of like how it will show up, say I'm searching for rentals in Tahoe again, and then in front of like every rental, we will have like an icon that will say tier 1 COVID certification, tier 3 COVID certification. So the users have some context on what it is, and then they can see like what level of certification it has received. And also for when they click into the COVID certification, it can also tell them about what that means. So that would be a basic experience I'll put together in the platform. And then in terms of like how I will get the data, the first thing that I will query or like try to make sure that we are able to collaborate is the public records of the medical institutions in that area would tell us like how many active cases have been reported. The second area we can go after is like, I know Apple and Facebook have these voluntary COVID trackers. So you can register your phone number and it can track like where you have been and what was the exposure in that area. So like to get to the next level, it can say how many people have visited, and people like with a certain phone number have visited that area, how much exposure they had. So that can come up with the overall score of COVID exposure. So those could be the starting ideas, and then we can fine tune as we make it more smarter.
All right, got it. So let's say this is how we're going to execute on it. Tying this back to our original strategy, this is the first leg of your strategy where you're providing guests with the reassurance they need to be able to book it. How are you going to measure if your strategy is working?
Okay, so that's a great question. A few more seconds here to think through the key metrics or success metrics here. Couple of like obvious things that we could look at is that the number of bookings or registrations from guests before and after in the areas, say we rolled it out in United States or certain key cities in United States. What is the delta in the number of bookings before and after we had this? So if that goes up, that would tell us. Another thing we could look at is the reviews of say people who actually came in and stayed. What are they saying about the service and the overall this new feature? And like one other thing would be users who have say stayed or used this once, say maybe if before COVID, a person who books an Airbnb books another Airbnb in say next 3 months. So we can look at that life cycle, like has that life cycle restored itself, that I booked once, now I'm comfortable. Am I booking again in that same amount of time, or has it helped in bringing back the same business like flywheel end? Those could be some key metrics, and quantitative and qualitative we could look at.
All right, fair enough. Let's say you have to very quickly summarize this particular part of your strategy, just the part around providing this information for guests to provide them reassurance, to say your manager in just 2 or 3 sentences, and take a minute to think about it. In just 2 or 3 sentences, how would you summarize this piece of your strategy to your manager?
Okay, so just so that I understand, I'm summarizing the overall, this whole solution that we came up with.
Only this solution. Yes, primarily this solution. Yeah.
Okay, give me a minute to come up with the summary. So here, the 2 or 3 sentences I would say around this is to build confidence in our guests with the ongoing pandemic around travel and using Airbnb as a booking platform. We are rolling out a COVID certification program. This program requires all the hosts on our platform to follow basic COVID safety practices, which we will inform our guests around. And we will have to ensure that to give more preference to hosts and guests who want to invest more in providing safety for COVID, we will also build tiers, starting from the basic tier to more advanced tiers. So our guests and hosts can have multiple options to work with around this overarching goal and strategy.
All right, cool. Got it. I'll go through the feedback like I usually do in a nutshell. So let's start from the top. Let's start from the strategy piece. So the good stuff is you start with a good way for fleshing out the different actors and the landscape you're operating in. And you didn't waste time, you just jump straight into the SWOT analysis. And you had a pretty thorough SWOT analysis. My only constructive would be, even in a question like this, it could be useful to ask certain clarifying questions. Such as if there is a strategy you've been asked to put together, is there a certain goal behind the strategy? Are we could be taking huge losses? So are we looking to suddenly increase our profitability? Are we looking to maybe use this as an opportunity to grab market share because a lot of other actors might be struggling? Are we using it as an opportunity to try out new ideas because customer preferences have changed so dramatically? So say virtual is in suddenly. There could be different goals. Your interviewer could have some of those in mind. So that's worth clarifying. And also, to make your life easier, is there a geographical scope? Are we just going to talk about the US, or is there a focus like business travelers or professional properties? Or is there a temporal element even? Are we coming up with the long-term strategy or the short, immediate strategy? Or do you want me to cover everything? Because that just makes it easier for you to concentrate on one thing. So for instance, if I said, hey, we're just going to focus on the immediate term, how do we react to the chaos? Then you'd necessarily focus your ideas on just that. Whereas if I'd say, hey, we're looking at the long term, like 5-year horizon, then you'd necessarily look at, hey, what are the big bets we could take at this time, given the changed customer preferences, right? So that could help you gain some focus for the rest of the interview. The SWOT analysis was really well done, not much feedback there. I did think it was slightly detailed, and that's totally okay. Some people might cut you off at a point there. It could be useful to like maybe, and this is pure nitpicky constructive, to like lead with an overall introduction to the SWOT analysis, just to give an idea of what you're going to do. So like for instance, the entire market landscape has changed. Customers want safety. Hosts are desperate for revenue because nobody's booking stuff. Everyone's got a certain risk aversion that underpins all decisions, and there's regulatory rules changing every day. So this leads to a lot of our core strengths. There are some things that we are weak in. There are opportunities, and then there are the threats where we don't yet know what we're going to do to like kind of frame the rest of your ideas. Within the weaknesses section, I thought you had good weaknesses, but I also saw an opportunity there to what's the right word? Flag those in really easy words so that they become memorable. So you flesh them out by describing the actual problem, like that properties are secluded, guests and home systems, there's less confidence, people are left unsure and puzzled. Just like flag them with our biggest weakness right now is that customers don't have trust and in the fact that these are non-professional properties, and customers don't have that reliability because they feel out of control. Like it's not standardized experience like Hilton. And you did do this for the other ones, for instance. You did do this for some of the other that you fleshed out. Then we came to the strategy itself. This is the part where I thought you did pretty well. Like you had good ideas on what elements you'd include into the strategy. And then you later talked about how you put this into a time horizon. My only feedback here is it could be useful to mention the time horizons, the sequence of those before the ideas, because then it looks like you've already got the plan in your head and now you're putting things in rather than coming up with the ideas and then putting them into a plan. So typically something like my strategy is going to cover 3 time horizon, like the short term, mid term and long term. In the short term, I'm going to rebuild trust and confidence by providing certifications and providing more context around what the situation on the ground is like. And in the mid and long term, I'm going to start coming up with collaborations with airlines and the like so that is secure, because those will need to also recover if we are to recover. And then again, that sounds like you've got the overall strategy in place rather than picking a bunch of ideas and shoehorning them into a strategy. Because it was clear you had it. It's just about how you frame it. All right. After this, we went into the actual product design and you fleshed out what customers look for, etc. I thought you did a good job of fleshing this out. There was great content in there. At one point, however, it seemed like the content was disconnected from the remit. So we were talking about COVID, right, as an underlying base. You start talking about customers' needs in terms of having a place to stay that meets their standards, have basic amenities before moving into the COVID part. So if you're going to do that, that's fine. That's actually a useful exercise to do. But I'd recommend like bucketing it and saying under normal circumstances, people would typically care about having a good place to stay, which meets their standards, has the basics in place. This has completely been overwhelmed by all these security and risks related to COVID that have cropped up. So now people care just as much as about like the health and hygiene factors. Has there been COVID cases nearby, and has this place potentially been exposed to the virus? And that's the new evolution in what customers look for that we really need to target properly in our short-term strategies. Then you came up with a list of ideas on what people could check. That was completely adequate. I just had like some others that I was also thinking alongside you. Some things you said triggered ideas in my head. So I'm going to list them out right now, but to be clear, that is not a prerequisite. But some ideas that, for instance, people might have some questions about what guests might have. Like, does this property have it? Is there sanitizer present? It's an Airbnb property, so can I get the key without meeting someone? Like, is there a gap between the previous guest staying and me staying? Are there robo cleaners, or is there going to be somebody new who comes in every day who might have been exposed? So these are good questions that people have right now, which could then be built into any kind of certification system. I also thought you did a good job covering what the host is looking for, like COVID test, is a person eligible for vaccine? And we then moved into the solutioning, where you came up with the 3 ideas. I thought all 3 had good potential, to be honest. I just wanted to go into the specific direction of the certification because I thought there's an opportunity to flesh out the design and metrics for this. I thought you did a good job. So there's different ways of doing it. I like the fact that you made it tiered so that people have like a one-word answer, like basic, advanced, what tier the property is in. There could be a lot more questions the interviewers would follow down here by asking, okay, what if someone doesn't execute on it? Are you going to remove them from the platform? And what would be the impact of that, etc.? The entire host side exploration could have been done if I had asked it, but we didn't. So there's no need to worry about that. But you came up with a good user flow. So these were things where you were very strong in. So the ideas, the fleshing out of what the experience will be like, extremely well done. Like merging it with Apple and Facebook. I did kind of throw a trap question by saying, how are you going to get this data? So that's something to watch out for. Again, this is pure constructive. It wasn't a prerequisite in this answer, but one way of getting the data could be from hosts themselves. In fact, this is what all the people have done so far. Like, just ask the host, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? And tell them that, hey, if you commit to doing something and a guest reports that you haven't actually done it, then you will immediately be deranked, or you'll be taken off the platform or paused. And then you've suddenly got an at scale. All properties just get a form saying, we know you're probably taking extra precautions. Just take a list of, here's what we think you might have done. And if you've done something extra, add it on, and then just make that an evolving list which keeps growing based on what people have actually said they've done. And then build a rating system, a certification system around that. Basics are quite clean and super high, whatever, to reassure guests. So that's just one additional execution idea in which you could hack things. But again, that wasn't a necessary thing, because you actually did have good ideas around COVID cases and public records and so on, which are also good. Metrics. So in metrics, you talked about 3 metrics. So I'd asked you a question of how will you measure if your strategy is working, right? You turn this into metrics, and that's fine, but it's also worth being aware that that's not there is to the strategy. So you need to ultimately first articulate like what the goal of this piece of the strategy is, and then see if it ties into that particular goal. The second piece of feedback here is that it doesn't necessarily have to be just quantitative metrics. You can have both qualitative and quantitative metrics, right? So qualitative, for instance, could just be like going around survey questions, like, do people find this content useful or not? And then there's the quantitative, which is, do we see an improvement in our metrics? Now, all the metrics you picked, you gave 3, which was the delta in bookings, the reviews of people who stayed, and how frequently they come back. All right. These are good metrics, but these are also, at least the latter 2 are lagging metrics, which means they happen quite a bit after the fact. But there are a lot of leading metrics you could also articulate, which is engagement and behavioral signals on, like, are people reading this content? Are people scrolling and like hovering over that certification to see what it's about? To find out, even at an earlier stage, are people actually finding this useful? Like, add a filter saying, does this property have extra hygiene precautions? Do people use that? It could even be a fake tour where you just tick that checkbox and say, hey, we are gathering this information. To already test, would your customers find this information useful in the shape or form that you are gathering it in? All right. So as a PM, it's important that you not build the entire thing and then test. It's important to break it into like the smallest step possible to get a signal. And this is all about, like, in your strategy, the way you explained it, you'd already have invested quite a bit of effort before you found out if it's working or not. So that's some feedback I had there. I thought your summary was good. The only part there is to also add the metrics in, because like if you explain the strategy really well, you explain the product very succinctly, but it's important to conclude with saying, we will know if we are being successful if we see bookings go up in the market that we're testing this with, and then we'll figure out how we scale it up to other markets. Or we would know if we are being successful if we see people engaging with this content. We need to improve the quality of our content and scale this up in additional markets and stuff like that. All right. So that is all from my side in a nutshell. Do you have any questions I could answer?
No, I think it's really great feedback. Like, you have a lot of like good points. I was taking notes. I did like the leading versus lagging metrics. I think that's a very good, like very insightful as I think about like what are my success metrics here. So yeah, I think like all of your feedback makes a lot of sense. So I was just taking notes. I really appreciate this. So I don't really have questions. I think I agree with most of it.
Cool. Yeah. Sounds good. Best of luck.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe. Our website is prepfully.com. We've got lots of interview questions there. You can also schedule a mock interview with one of our experts. You can find the link in the description below. And we hope you totally rock your interview.